Welcome to this new automotive news video for Wednesday, April 15th, 2026. Today, of course, we're going to talk about Renault, which has announced it will lay off a large part of its automotive engineers. We'll look together at the reasons behind this and what it reveals about the current state of the Renault group. We'll also, of course, talk about the new Volkswagen ID.3 Neo, about which we have plenty of new information. And you'll see that while Volkswagen talks a lot about its range, it's actually very discreet about various technical aspects where, in reality, it's not as good as the previous generation of the ID.3. And then we'll finish with two news items about Stellantis, since, believe it or not, the current head of the group is trying to relaunch Stellantis in China just a few months after it went bankrupt there, because one of its brands, Fiat, just confirmed a new generation of the Fiat 500, and we're getting details. Before that, I'll share a quick news update. By the way, the good news of the day is that yesterday, against all odds, and after yet another attempt by Macron's supporters to keep the LEZs alive, the National Assembly has voted for the permanent removal of low-emission zones. However, there is still one last vote to be held today, the Senate vote. This is the very last step, and if the Senate approves the removal of the LEZs, we probably won't hear about them ever again. And that's good news, since it's a measure likely rejected by 80% of the French people. Now we're going to tackle the topics that were on the agenda for this video, and I hope you'll find them interesting. If that's the case, as usual, I'm counting on you to give my channel a little boost. For free, you can leave a like on this video, boost it to improve its ranking, subscribe for future videos, and never miss my car news again. And of course, you can also leave a little comment where you simply share your opinion about today's news. Alright, let's start with big news from Renault, which just announced plans to lay off many of its engineers. So it's an announcement that's both a surprise and not a surprise, because on one hand, when Renault publishes its numbers, it's quite satisfied. Renault cars are selling pretty well, especially the electric ones compared to the competition. It's not the car company you'd expect to be hit hardest by the current automotive crisis. On the other hand, when you know that its current boss, François Provost, has a goal to raise the group's operating margin, and so to reduce costs, well, it's not that surprising since that's the main reason why Renault is letting go of its engineers. It's simply to reduce costs. This affects all of Renault's research centers around the world. And of course, it also affects France. You should know that we're talking about roughly 20% of the engineers who will be laid off over the next 2 years. A very interesting thing, and I think this really gets to the heart of the matter, is that not all of Renault's entities are affected. For example, ORS, which is a joint venture created with the Chinese group Geely and is dedicated to the creation and development of combustion and hybrid powertrains, is not affected. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the division that will be most affected is the electric car development division. Indeed, what's particularly interesting is that we know, for example, the latest Renault Twingo Electric was developed and designed by Chinese engineers. So what's the point of continuing to pay French engineers to work on electric cars if China, with its expertise that surpasses European brands when it comes to batteries and electric powertrains, is making better electric cars? Faster and especially for much less money, since Chinese engineers are much cheaper than French engineers. Renault doesn't hide it, which is either the worst or best part, at least it's honest. Renault, as they say, is laying off workers to maintain its competitiveness, so understand that as its prices and its profit margin in the face of Chinese manufacturers who are able to develop cars much faster and much cheaper. Let's not forget that Renault is 15% owned by the French state, and so far, the French state hasn't lifted a finger to prevent or block this. The only positive thing is that Renault explained there would be no outright layoffs, meaning that everyone who will be let go in this workforce reduction plan will receive good severance packages. Still, we can wonder what will remain for us in French industry. Because Renault is relocating the production of its cars, let's remember that now Spain will get the production of several of the group's electric models. But now it's also increasingly relocating the design of its vehicles. Renault, in a few years, will apparently have very little left that's French. At Volkswagen this morning, they announced the new Volkswagen ID.3 Neo, which is simply the new generation of the ID.3. The good news is that the entire design has been reworked, including the interior. And that's really great news, because the previous generation of the ID.3 was particularly strange. Not to say ugly. Now we have a slightly more modern look with a Volkswagen logo that lights up, light strips at the front that go all around the grille and extend to the outside of the headlights, as well as new front lights. And above all, they've finally stopped offering two-tone tailgates. The previous ID.3 had a black panel around the rear lights that looked toy-like, but that's gone. It's now monochrome, and I think it's much better. Inside, there are a lot of changes too. The dashboard has been completely redesigned and now features a 10.2-inch digital instrument cluster without a bezel or hood, inspired by what they've done on the latest generation of the Volkswagen T-Roc, for example. Another change, and it's a welcome one too, is that there's now a 12.9-inch central screen for infotainment, and several functions like climate control are no longer managed through the touchscreen, but are now available directly through physical controls. Buttons that are much easier to use. By the way, it's the same for the steering wheel. There are no more haptic buttons. Before, there were semi-touch buttons that allowed you to adjust different things, but now there are more traditional plastic controls, and that's better. There's also, and this is probably the most important thing when buying a car, some upgrades to the technical side with a new motor and new batteries. The base version still has 170 horsepower with a 50 kilowatt battery for a range of 417 kilometers. An intermediate version has 190 horsepower, a 58 kilowatt battery, and a range of 494 kilometers. And the big version, the 230 horsepower version with a 79 kilowatt battery, and up to a claimed 630 kilometers of range. On the other hand, and this goes a bit against the trend among other manufacturers who have prioritized charging times over total range, the charging speed of this ID.3 NEO is lower than the previous ID.3. And we're talking about a big difference here, since it goes from 145 kilowatt down to 105 kilowatt for certain versions, which is what the previous ID.3 did, but more importantly, it's worse than most current standard vehicles. So it still takes 26 minutes to go from 10 to 80% charge, and there's still no option that allows with AC charging, so let's say slow charging at home, to go from 11 to 22 kilowatts. For now, there's one thing we don't know about this new ID.3 NEO, and that's the final price. They're talking about prices that should start from 35,000 euros. I still hope for Volkswagen's sake that it will be much cheaper than that because, for example, a Renault 5 electric, which has similar range and similar charging power, still costs 4,000 euros less. But also because for just about 2,000 euros more, you could get a Model 3, which offers much more range. 534 kilometers, that's still 120 more than the entry-level versions of the ID.3 NEO. But it also offers much faster charging. We're talking here, if I'm not mistaken, about 180 kilowatt peak. It's not just the peak that matters. The average is important too. However, Tesla's charging times are much shorter than the ID.3 NEO, making the ID.3 NEO still seem expensive. That's what it is, but let me know your thoughts in the comments. We'll end with two Stellantis updates. First, Stellantis is trying to return to China. Remember, in 2025, we talked about the fact that the Stellantis joint venture with GAC, a Chinese automotive group, was simply going bankrupt. It wasn't profitable for Stellantis to stay there. They weren't selling enough cars and the prices were too low. In short, it was the end of Stellantis' adventure in China. The former leader, Carlos Tavares, made the decision, but the new leader of Stellantis sees things differently and is trying to re-establish Stellantis in China by opening a new partnership with the Dongfeng brand. You should know that even though Stellantis' main activities in China had gone bankrupt, they were still present locally there thanks to Dongfeng. For example, Citroën currently has its C5X produced in China in Dongfeng's factories. According to the first reports we have about this partnership, for Stellantis, it's about securing its future in China, at least for the next 3 years. By using Dongfeng's expertise and production capabilities on site to produce several models there, but also to design several new models there, like for example a new Jeep that is currently being co-developed in China by Stellantis, as well as by two brands from the Dongfeng group. So, will it work? Will it last long? We'll have to wait to find out. In any case, what we do know, on the other hand, is that Stellantis is not giving up on Europe. As proof, they have just confirmed that a new generation of electric Fiat 500 is in development. As proof, Fiat, a brand of the Stellantis group, has just confirmed that a new version with a new battery and greater range of the electric Fiat 500 is planned for 2027, and that a new generation of the Fiat 500 is in development for 2030. Hopefully, these new electric 500s won't make the same mistakes as the current generation, because the current generation of the electric Fiat 500 is almost unsellable. Currently, the cheapest electric 500 is 23,900 euros for 190 km of WLTP range. Let me tell you, in practice, that's less than 100 kilometers. When competitors offer cars at these prices that go 2 or 3 times farther, that's pretty outrageous. Let's hope Fiat doesn't repeat past mistakes. Otherwise, it'll likely have the same lack of commercial success. Let me remind you that in the first quarter of 2026, there are some areas in the world, like in the United States, where Fiat sold fewer new electric Fiat 500s than Fiat 500Xs, even though the Fiat 500X isn't even in Fiat's American catalog anymore. They're just old models in stock being sold off, yet they're outselling the electric Fiat 500, which is the only official car in the US catalog. We'll see. That's today's news. Hope you found the video interesting. If that's the case, I'm counting on you to show it as usual by leaving a like and subscribing. And why not become a supporter by clicking the join button below this video? See you tomorrow for the next automotive news video. Bye.